Hello everyone, it's time for another update video. The topic here is, now that Persona 4 is over, what's next for the channel? I've got a lot of ideas, but firstly I'll mention that Persona 4 is not entirely over. There's going to be quite a bit of bonus content. The plan is one video covering the TV listings, New Game Plus features, as well as the Midnight Trivia Miracle Quiz, which you need to do for one of the trophies. After that, there'll be a video on the New Game Plus exclusive Persona and the Super Boss. Now, this was recorded actually before I started recording the playthrough, so none of the Personas that I use here will be the same ones from the main series. Speaking of pre-recorded videos, I also have the romance routes for all of the female social links. Well, most of them. I still need to record footage for Ayane and Eyes. As well as the drama version of the Sun social link, I also want to do all of the Mr. Edagawa's TV Classroom videos, and also a video on Persona 4's unused content, both the original and Golden, which will probably take a while to make and might be in several videos, because there's quite a lot of stuff to cover there. I might also use this time to go back and cover the new DLC characters in Smash Bros. Ultimate, in preparation for Sephiroth dropping this month, which I'm definitely excited for. But what's next after all of that? Well, I've had a few ideas in the long time it's taken me to cover Persona 4, I just didn't want to say anything until it had finished, because I didn't want people spending the last few videos of P4 just looking forward to what I'm doing next. I'm going to divide the rest of this video into 3 sections. A couple of shorter interim projects that I might want to do before my major series, then the things that I'm considering for my next major series, and finally, a few games that I mentioned wanting to cover at some point in the past, but that I'm a lot less enthusiastic about doing now. It doesn't mean these will never happen though, they're just less of a priority. Okay, so, first up, after the huge prepared project that was Persona 4 with a lot of research and a lot of bios to work on, I feel like doing something a little bit lighter that wouldn't require that many bios or preparation, something that I can just casually record and play, in the vein of Smash Bros. Ultimate World of Light that I did towards the end of 2018 and the start of 2019. And while I did Crash Bandicoot 3 in between the Trails series and Persona 4, I don't want to do Crash Bandicoot 1 now, because it would just be a bit too predictable doing another Crash game as an interim project. And I also really don't want to have to do the Platinum Relics for that game anytime soon. I'll definitely cover Crash 1 at some point, I might leave it for now. So, I have 2 ideas for this, and both of them are extremely dumb. At least in my opinion, but I thought I'd share them here anyway. So, dumb idea number 1. A series that I really love and that I've been thinking of getting back into recently is Xenoblade Chronicles. I was thinking that one day I might want to do a playthrough of Xenoblade Definitive Edition on this channel. Now obviously that's not what I'm referring to here for the short interim project between major series. And the words short and Xenoblade are probably making you very confused, but here is dumb idea number 1. A blind playthrough of Torna the Golden Country. I bought this DLC ages ago, around when it came out, but intentionally didn't play it because I was saving it for a potential blind recording, having a feeling it would be quite short, and according to how long to beat, it definitely is. Fun fact, I actually considered doing this as a project a long time ago. It was my original plan for the end of 2018, before Smash Ultimate announced World of Light, and I decided to do that instead. There are, however, 2 major problems with doing this that I see. Problem number 1. While it is a mostly self-contained story from what I've heard, it is a prequel to the main game of Xenoblade Chronicles 2, and it does inherently contain a few spoilers for that storyline. So my worry is this series will be a bit of a turn-off to a lot of people on this channel. If you want to play Xenoblade Chronicles 2 in the future, you might want to avoid this because it does spoil things, but if you don't, then you might be very confused by a lot of elements that make more sense if you played the main story. The second problem is timing. At the time I'm recording this update video, Chugga Conroy is in the middle of a Let's Play of Xenoblade Chronicles 2, and he's confirmed that he will be doing Torna. This is part of the reason why I've wanted to do this, because I'm watching that series, and so I know that this is my last chance to play Torna blind. However, if I upload this series now, it might feel like I'm cashing in on his Let's Play, and that's really not what I'm intending to do. But I can see why it might come across as a bit awkward, especially to those of you who are following his playthrough and are planning on waiting until he covers it. I was also considering recording this now, but not uploading it until after Chugga finishes his series, but that's probably not going to be for a very, very, very long time. And I do know that Xenoblade Chronicles has really become Chugga's thing. If I ever did do a playthrough of Definitive Edition, it wouldn't be quite to the same extent of his, it might be a bit more casual. I just feel like I'm not Chugga, obviously, and I have my own thoughts on the game and my own experiences that I am quite keen on sharing. And I felt that Torna could be a good testing ground for if a Xenoblade game is a good fit for my style or not. So that's dumb idea number 1. Now here's dumb idea number 2, which is actually slightly related. Final Fantasy XII: The Zodiac Age. So, yeah, the reason why I'm lumping this in as a dumb idea is this is a massive JRPG, and obviously, I'd probably be uploading this in stages. I wouldn't be doing the whole game at once. I do parts of this on my own time in between projects or as a side series to another project that's ongoing. So, why consider this game? Well, this was actually the first Final Fantasy game I ever played. Not only that, it was the first JRPG that I played outside of Pokemon, I'm pretty sure. But, I played it when it was relatively new on the PlayStation 2, and I have never played Zodiac Age before. So this series would be a weird take on a blind run that I'd like to call a rediscovery run. I thought it might be fun to play through the remaster of a game that I played as a kid, and see what I remember, what I don't remember, if there were elements of the story that went over my head as a kid, anything new that I noticed about the gameplay. And I felt it would be an interesting game to do this with because this game, well, it went through what almost every Final Fantasy game suffers from. When it first came out, I remember this game was absolutely loathed by most circles. Then 13 came out, all the hatred transferred to it, and people started reevaluating 12 in a more positive light. It's kind of scary how often this cycle repeats itself with most Final Fantasy games. But I do agree, this game was vindicated by history in a lot of ways. In particular, it is very much a proto-Xenoblade, in terms of having big areas to explore, and its combat being kind of a midpoint between turn-based and action. Its story is also much more well received now than it was back in the day, so that will be fun to re-experience. Of the two crazy ideas, I'm leaning more towards this one, as it might be a nice complement to some of the other Xenoblade content that's going on at the moment, rather than actually being Xenoblade. But tell me what you all think in the comments. So those are the two ideas for Interim series that I have. In terms of my next main project, there are 3 that I'm considering. Trails in the Sky the Third, Tearing Saga, and Digital Devil Saga. Each of them have their own unique pros and cons. Trails in the Sky the Third, the pros. It is currently, I think, still my favourite game in the Trails series. It also has my favourite soundtrack of any video game, and I'm not exaggerating here. The third is a very interesting game in that, despite following on directly from Trails in the Sky FC and SC, it tells its own self-contained story that has a very different style to those games, being very much an in-depth psychological character study of its main character Kevin. I compare it to Fire Emblem Three Houses Azure Moon in a lot of ways. It also wraps up a lot of loose ends when it comes to the characters from the Sky games. Everyone who was playable in those games comes back here, and many of the characters like Julia Schwartz, who didn't get much of a chance to shine in Sky SC, get a lot more screen time in the third. It's also by far the most balanced game using the Sky battle system, and in fact I think it has some of the best gameplay in the series. If you watch my Trails in the Sky SC videos, you might have realised that magic was way more powerful than physical attacks. How they dealt with this in 3rd was interesting. They heavily buffed physical attacks, but they didn't nerf magic either. As a result, both physical and magic are equally broken, and when everything's broken, nothing is. That basically sums up the gameplay of Sky the Third, and it's really fun because of that. It's not to say that it's easy either, it's still quite a challenge, and some of the achievements will require me to play on Nightmare. Don't worry though, its Nightmare is much more balanced than SC's Nightmare. This game has a great soundtrack, some pretty awesome and unique dungeons, a great premise, and some really, really good boss fights. It also wouldn't require much preparation besides one quick test playthrough, because these kind of games don't really lend themselves that well to bios. Much of the character stat screens and augments are pretty self-explanatory of what they can do. And now the cons though. One of them is, this game has a pretty short and bare bones main story, but a huge amount of side contents. Unfortunately, much of this side content consists of just static images and text. It's a lot of great world building, don't get me wrong, but I'm not sure how well it's going to work in terms of a YouTube Let's Play. And that's the other thing that I'll get to. Playing Sky FC and SC, I was glad to introduce a lot of people to the Trails series, but I started to wonder whether or not there's a reason why these games don't have a lot of Let's Plays on YouTube. They're very, very wordy, and they often take a long time to get going. I noticed that the view counts, and I normally don't really pay much attention to these, but it was very noticeable here, were high for the introductory episodes of Trails in the Sky FC, but they dropped off hard to an average of around 500 views per video very, very quickly. So, I know that, again, views aren't everything, but it definitely is a bit of a dismotivator to put so much work into videos and to not have a lot of people watch them. The other con is, I have started to feel a little bit disillusioned with the Trails series lately, thanks to some things in its fandom, and a lot of the fanbase finally getting to play the full Cold Steel saga in English and realizing that after all the build-up, the plot that they were heading towards for Erebonia kind of devolved into generic shonen, and the Cold Steel games had a lot of bloat and filler in them. Not to mention there's been a little bit of weird localization politics, as I like to call it, with the Cold Steel games. Basically, Xseed localized Cold Steel 1 and 2, and NIS America localized 3 and 4. And NIS America has been aggressively promoting Cold Steel 3 and 4 as standalone games that you don't have to play 1 and 2 in order to understand, which has led some fans to suspect it might be a bit of a conspiracy to undermine their localization competition. And there's also a lot of hatred and controversy surrounding one of the composers for the newer Trails games. What's this guy's crime, you may ask? His songs being slightly worse than the other composers. Really. So to put it shortly, a number of factors have left me a bit jaded on the Trails series recently, but I am looking forward to doing Sky the Third at least. Next up, Tiering Saga. Now, I was originally planning on doing this after Persona 4. The issue is, it might require a little bit more research. There's actually a surprisingly large number of secrets in Tiering Saga, especially where the epilogue is concerned. There may not be support conversations in this game in a traditional sense, but there are optional events between characters that are sometimes mutually exclusive with other character events, and these can affect who marries who in the epilogue. I might need to look on the Fire Emblem subreddit and see if I can find some people more well-versed with this series to fully understand how this works, because I've heard that Shigen and Julia, two adoptive siblings, only hook up in the epilogue if certain conditions are met, yet in all of my playthroughs, and in every single Let's Play I've seen of the game, they always hooked up in the epilogue. And I personally ship him more with Sierra, so if there's a way to avoid him ending up with Julia, I'd be interested to hear it. But the main reason why I might want to delay this a bit is this is very much a classic Fire Emblem in all but name, and that means a lot of playable characters and a lot of bios to go over. Which is gonna take me a long time to make. There's also not much official art out there of the Tearing Saga characters. In terms of gameplay mechanics, I think I've mostly got them down. There are some very good resources out there that go into a lot of the eccentricities, such as the fact that killing enemies on certain types of terrain will very, very slightly increase that character's hit and avoid on that terrain, I believe, as well as killing a lot of enemies of a specific class. These bonuses are pretty minuscule, but I find them really interesting to talk about at least. So there might be a delay in getting this out, but this will probably happen sometime in 2021, and it is the next major quote-unquote Fire Emblem game I want to cover on the channel. And now, Digital Devil Saga. So this game is a spin-off of the Shin Megami Tensei series, much like Persona. This was Atlus's first attempt at creating an SMT game that appealed to mainstream audiences. It uses Nocturne's press turn system and takes a lot of its assets from that game. And you still fight against SMT demons as enemies, but instead of fusing and recruiting them yourself, you use a party of predetermined characters, each with their own personality and role in the story, who transform during battle. But don't think the lack of fusion means there's not a lot of customization in this game. Characters go through a skill tree and learn abilities from mastering mantra. If you played Tokyo Mirage Sessions, this is basically the exact same as the Carnage system from that game, except that it contains something that I really wish TMS did. Once you learn a skill on a character, that character has that skill permanently. It goes into that character's pool of learned skills that they can pick and choose a moveset from at any time. The one downside is everyone's pool of skills is different, so if you have someone with Dia and you want someone else with Dia, that second character has to master the Dia mantra on their own. The game also has a unique mechanic where you can master mantra faster by quote-unquote devouring enemies. This is possibly a downside of covering this game. It has cannibalism as both a plot point and a game mechanic, but it's actually nowhere near as dark as it sounds. Gameplay is entirely bloodless, and there's only like one instance of gore in an early cutscene, and that's about it. This game has an M rating in America, but it doesn't have Mara, and for the most part, I don't think it's really that bad. It's also, in my opinion, one of the more optimistic SMT games. And it has a very unique story, but to say anything more will be huge spoilers, because it's one of those games that's set in a very mysterious world, and the story is all about finding out why the world is the way it is. The main reason I want to do a playthrough of this game is that I simply really enjoy it. It's actually a great starting point into mainline SMT if you've only played Persona, because it has the press turn system, but none of the lore chaos baggage that turns off a lot of people from the mainline games. I've heard it described as a PlayStation 2 era Final Fantasy game with the Shin Megami Tensei battle system, and I think that's very accurate. This game actually has the most solidly designed battle system of any turn-based RPG I've played, in my opinion, and I would be very glad to show this off for all of you. I would also be doing bios for the main party members and talking a little bit about what mantra that I recommend mastering. As for cons, well, I said before, the premise might be alienating to some people, but as I said, I don't think it's anywhere near as dark as it sounds, although from what I've seen of the second game's cutscenes, there's a lot more blood there. Speaking of which, the other con is that as of now, I have not played the sequel. I know the plot of the sequel, and I've watched a lot of boss fights online, but I've never played it myself, and I probably will want to before I do a playthrough of the first game. The third con is that Digital Devil Saga 1 has a super boss that's particularly infamous. Many people consider it to be the hardest super boss in any JRPG. It's only fightable on a New Game Plus, and I plan to take the same approach as I did in Persona 4. I would prepare a New Game Plus file in advance and record the fight ahead of time. This is because this fight requires a lot of preparation and grinding, And it requires going all over the mantra grid with a lot of different characters and a lot of om-nom-nomming various enemies in optional dungeons. All that for a fight that's considered difficult even at level 99, and one that takes an hour even in an optimal speedrun. But it's a fight that I do really want to cover on my channel at least someday. The other downside of this game is that if I did do it, I would probably have to play something else on the side. Because as far as JRPGs go, this game is pretty much nothing but dungeons. Constantly dungeons and dungeons and dungeons with random encounters all the way from the start to the end. There's very little in the way of towns, fields, or downtime outside of cutscenes. So playing this game in long bursts, I find, can get very draining. It's a fantastic game, don't get me wrong, but it's one I'd recommend not marathoning. The final con of this game is I'm really not sure how best to record it. The copy that I have of this game is the PlayStation 3 PSN version. Now, I've heard this one actually runs slower than it did on PS2, but DDS2 on PS3 runs faster than it did on PS2, so it's a bit of a trade-off. But the resolution goes back down to 480p while the PS3 is running this game, and I'm not sure how good that will look with videos. I've actually got a test recording of this game already uploaded, where I try several methods, and I'd like to just show that off to see which one of them you guys prefer. There's one method I definitely won't be using though, and that's emulating it. Most footage of this game that looks so crisp and clear on YouTube is done via an emulator, and I just don't like using that, because I just feel it's doing things with the graphics that you couldn't have done on the original hardware, which I feel is not really fair to showcasing the original game the way that it was quote-unquote meant to be experienced. But with that, those are the 3 games that I'm thinking of as my next major project. Let me know what you think in the comments. Right now I'm leaning towards Trails in the Sky the Third, just because that one won't require as much preparation, but I think I might be doing some prep work for Digital Devil Saga on the side, because I would really love to show that game off. So that's it for plans for the near future, but now the slightly more depressing part of the video, games that I was originally keen on playing but am less keen on now. This doesn't mean that I'll never do these games on this channel, but it does mean they're more on the back burner for now. The first is Pokemon Heart Gold No Experience, and by extension, any other Pokemon No Experience challenges. I had a lot of fun with Black and White, and was planning on doing either Black 2 or Pokemon Heart Gold, some of my favourite Pokemon games, with these rules in mind. I've even played a bit of a No Experience challenge of Heart Gold on my own time, and Faulkner was a surprisingly epic battle. But I've noticed that in recent times, there's been a big change in the way Pokemon challenge runs are perceived and presented on YouTube. Basically, nowadays, they tend to look something like this. I don't know exactly when this style of video became popular, but now it seems like people condense highlights from a challenge into a single video, instead of doing a full playthrough. Usually they stream their run and take the highlights from that, and well, streaming is still not something I'm interested in. And I found the advent of these can you beat blah 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 videos has almost killed off the genre of full challenge playthroughs of Pokemon games. But Pokemon in general has seen a radical shift in the way it's covered on YouTube in recent years and what constitutes a PokeTuber. Without getting too cynical here, I just feel like these days it's either ROM hacks or yelling about Sword and Shield. And if you're not doing either of those, then nobody wants to watch Pokemon content anymore. With Mariland leaving YouTube for completely understandable reasons, mind you, but it's still sad, I feel like Chugga Conroy is one of the few people who can get away with quote-unquote traditional style Pokemon Let's Plays anymore. The market for them and demographic for them has just changed so much, and I feel like it would be best to focus on my own niches than Pokemon. The second game that I'm less enthusiastic about covering these days is Tokyo Mirage Sessions. This was a game that I originally planned to do a full in-depth walkthrough of. In fact, I partly did Persona 3 on the channel as a lead-up to it, and I planned to skip Persona 4 and do Tokyo Mirage Sessions, then go to Persona 5 originally. I even had a headcanon framing device that Life Will Change was a song written by Fortuna Entertainment about the Phantom Thieves. The reason why I've drifted away from this game is less itself and more the fact that I've come to notice a lot of people really like my Persona content, so I feel I'd rather focus on games like Persona 5, the Arena games, Persona Q2, and covering this game in the same level of depth would be dedicating a lot of energy and time that could be going towards games that would have a much better reception. TMS is a weird game. I love its gameplay, but I fully admit that it being a crossover in name only is very alienating, and it feels very jarring for Atlus to have a game that's entirely positive on the idol industry, when their Persona series dedicates quite a lot of plot points and even entire games, in the case of Dancing All Night, to brutally criticizing the corruption and exploitation in Japan's real-life idol industry. For a long time, I wanted to do a series on this game to try and quote-unquote change people's minds about it, but recently I've started to realize I don't really want to change people's minds about this game. I honestly think there are a lot of valid reasons why it turns off a lot of people, and I'm completely okay if you don't like it. It's quite hard to play a game entirely for its gameplay and ignore every other aspect of it, which is, in my mind, exactly what you have to do to enjoy Tokyo Mirage Sessions. While I'm here, I could quickly mention a third game that I considered in the past that I still might do in the future, but it may take a little while, and that is Radiant Historia. This is a game that I'd love to cover on the channel someday. It's a very niche, overlooked RPG that has story and music worked on by people who worked on Persona 3, and gameplay done by people responsible for Devil Survivor. And it has a very interesting take on time travel plots in RPGs. The only reason why this is less of a priority right now is the fact that there's a 3DS re-release and I haven't played that version and am not familiar with any of the new content in it. Before I close off, I think I should address what's next for me and Persona content, because I know I'm going to get a lot of these questions. So firstly, Persona 5. A lot of people are asking me if I would play Persona 5. Well, one, definitely not immediately after Persona 4 Golden. I want to stagger these series out a little bit. They do take a lot out of you. I also would like to wait until Persona 5 Royal is a little bit older. I'm not saying that it's going to be as many years as there were between my Persona 3 and 4 playthroughs, it probably won't be, but it will be a little bit just because I want to give opinions some time to solidify within the fanbase, and for there to be less recency bias around the game. On that note, Persona Q2 I'd prefer to save until after I cover Persona 5, just because it heavily features the Phantom Thieves and a lot of elements of their story. As for the two Arena games, I've talked in Persona 4 about why I'm slightly worried about covering them. They're basically visual novels with a few very short, very easy one-round fighting matches in between some of the segments. And for the first Arena, I had the awkward issue of choosing which character's story to cover for the main playthrough because I'm definitely not going to show all of them. The manga goes with Yosuke's story, and most people have recommended that one as being great character development for him, so I might show that, but there are some other storylines that reveal elements of the wider plot that his doesn't cover. I'll definitely need to show Labris's story, and I might show one of these Shadow Operative stories too, because they usually have a different final boss. Arena and Ultimax would be quite short series, so I plan on covering them perhaps sometime right before I cover Persona 5, as maybe a refresher course on Persona before I get back into it. Persona 4 Arena Ultimax in particular, I feel is the perfect send-off to the cast of both Persona 3 and Persona 4, so it will be quite a special occasion when I cover that game. So that's all for this update video. Let me know what you think in the comments, and I'll see you all for whatever I decide to do next.